On the coldest night of winter, when the wind outside their broken apartment window howled like it was angry at the world, a 10-year-old boy lay awake on a thin mattress on the floor, staring at the cracked ceiling above him. He could hear his mother in the kitchen trying to cry quietly so he wouldn't notice, but he always noticed. The fridge was almost empty, the heater barely worked, the rent was overdue again, and his father? Gone. Just a name on an old photo buried in a drawer. That night, as snow covered the streets of their small Canadian neighborhood, the boy made a silent promise. He would not let this be there forever. He didn't know how, he didn't know when. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. One day, his mother would never cry over unpaid bills again. What he didn't realize was that this promise would cost him sleep, comfort, friends, and nearly his spirit. And the first test of that promise was coming sooner than he ever imagined. Life in that broken home followed a painful routine. His mother worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and serving coffee at a small downtown cafe in the morning. She barely slept. Some days she forgot to eat. The boy learned early that childhood was a luxury they couldn't afford. While other kids talked about video games and vacations, he thought about grocery prices and bus fare. At school, he wore the same shoes all year, even when winter soaked them with slush. He never complained, he never asked for more. But he watched. He observed the world carefully. He noticed how some families lived in warm houses with steady lights and full refrigerators. He didn't envy them, he studied them. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet fire began to burn. He realized that poverty wasn't just about money, it was about choices. And he decided, even at that young age, that he would learn how to create better choices. What he didn't yet understand was how cruel the world can be to a boy with big dreams and empty pockets. The teasing started in middle school. It was subtle at first, whispers about his clothes, jokes about his old backpack, comments about how he never joined field trips. Then it grew louder. One afternoon, a group of boys laughed when they saw him counting coins for lunch. He felt his face burn, but he refused to cry. That humiliation became fuel. Instead of breaking him, it sharpened him. He began spending hours at the public library after school, not because he loved books at first, but because it was warm and free. Over time, something changed. He discovered stories of entrepreneurs, inventors, immigrants who came to Canada with nothing and built something. He read about discipline. He read about sacrifice. He realized that pain could either destroy you or train you. And slowly, the library became his sanctuary. But knowledge alone would not change his life. He would soon face a choice that would test whether he truly believed in the dream growing inside him. At 15, reality hit harder than ever. His mother collapsed from exhaustion one evening after returning from her night shift. The doctor said it was stress, lack of sleep, and overwork. In that hospital hallway, staring at white walls and listening to machines beep, the boy felt something shift inside him. Fear turned into urgency. Dreams were no longer optional, they were necessary. The next day, he looked for work. Grocery stores, car washes, construction cleanup, anywhere that would hire a teenager. He balanced school during the day and work in the evenings. Homework was done past midnight. Sleep became a stranger. But every paycheck, no matter how small, went straight to helping his mother. For the first time, he felt a sense of control. He wasn't just dreaming anymore, he was moving. Still, deep down, he knew small jobs would not be enough to break the cycle. He needed a bigger vision, and that vision was about to reveal itself in the most unexpected way. A few weeks after his mother returned home from the hospital, the boy noticed something during one of his part-time shifts at a small grocery store. The store owner, a quiet immigrant man, arrived before everyone and left after everyone. He wasn't just working in the business, he owned it. One evening, while restocking shelves, the boy gathered the courage to ask him a simple question. "How did you build this?" The owner smiled and said, "I bought a small store. No one believed in worked every day for 10 years and never spent money to look rich." That sentence hit him like lightning. Own, don't just work. Build, don't just survive. That night, instead of scrolling on his old cracked phone, he started researching businesses, investments, and how money truly worked. He learned about saving, about compound interest, about small risks taken consistently. While other teenagers spent their paychecks on clothes, he saved nearly every dollar. It was not easy. Temptation surrounded him, but he remembered the hospital hallway, he remembered the unpaid bills, and he chose discipline over comfort. What he didn't realize was that saving money was the smallest part of the transformation. The real change was happening in his mindset. By the time he turned 18, he had saved more money than anyone expected from someone in his situation. It wasn't a fortune, but it was proof of discipline. University acceptance letters arrived, but tuition costs felt overwhelming. Instead of seeing barriers, he saw strategy. He chose a local college program in business and worked full-time evenings in construction to pay for classes. His days became a cycle: sunrise classes, afternoon study sessions, night shifts lifting heavy materials in freezing Canadian winters. His hands developed calluses, his back ached. But his mind grew sharper. While mixing concrete and carrying lumber, he listened to business podcasts through cheap headphones. He treated every construction site like a classroom, observing project managers, understanding costs, watching leadership in action. Slowly, a new dream formed: real estate development. He didn't just want a job, he wanted to build properties, create housing, and provide stability, the kind he never had. But ambition attracts doubt, and soon he would face criticism from people who thought he was aiming far beyond his limits. Friends told him he was overworking. Some said he should be realistic. Even relatives quietly suggested he focus on a stable job instead of risky dreams. The words hurt more than the winter wind. For a moment, doubt crept in. Who was he to think he could build something big? He came from nothing. No connections, no financial safety net. Just a tired mother and a broken apartment. One night, exhausted, he almost convinced himself to slow down, to accept an ordinary path. But then he saw his mother asleep on the couch, still in her work uniform, too tired to even change. That image destroyed his doubt. He realized something powerful. People project their fears onto others. Their limits did not have to become his. From that night forward, he reduced distractions, stopped attending pointless gatherings, and focused entirely on skill building and saving. Discipline became his identity. Still, success would not come immediately, and the next failure would test whether his belief was truly unbreakable. At 22, with years of savings and careful planning, he made his first investment, a small, run-down duplex in a struggling neighborhood. Everyone warned him it was a mistake. The property needed repairs. The area had a bad reputation. But he saw potential where others saw problems. He invested nearly everything he had. For months, he worked on renovations himself after his construction shifts, learning plumbing, painting walls, fixing floors. Progress was slow. Unexpected expenses appeared. At one point, he almost ran out of money completely. Stress returned. Sleep disappeared again. There were nights he sat alone in the unfinished living room, wondering if he had just destroyed everything he had built. But instead of quitting, he adapted. He negotiated better deals on materials. He learned budgeting in real time. And finally, after months of relentless effort, the duplex was ready. The first tenants moved in. The first rental payments arrived. It wasn't massive wealth, but it was momentum. And momentum, he would soon discover, changes everything. The first rental payment was not large, but when he held that check in his hand, it felt heavier than gold. It was proof. Proof that ownership worked. Proof that risk, when calculated and backed by discipline, could shift a life. He didn't celebrate with expensive dinners or new clothes. Instead, he reinvested every dollar back into the property and began studying how to scale. He spent late nights analyzing housing trends across Canadian cities, learning about zoning laws, mortgages, and market cycles. While others his age were chasing quick money or instant status, he was building foundations quietly. Within a year, he refinanced the duplex and used the equity to secure another small property. This time, he moved smarter, faster, more strategic. The fear that once paralyzed him was now replaced by controlled confidence. But success brings a new kind of pressure. Expectations grow, risks increase. And just when he started feeling stable, the housing market shifted unexpectedly, and he would soon learn that resilience matters even more than ambition. An economic slowdown hit. Interest rates climbed, property values stalled. Suddenly, what looked like steady growth became uncertain territory. One of his tenants lost their job and couldn't pay rent on time. Repairs on the second property cost more than expected. For the first time since he began investing, fear returned in full force. He remembered the broken apartment of his childhood and wondered if he was about to fall back into that same instability. But this time, he was not the same boy. Instead of panicking, he reviewed his finances carefully. He cut unnecessary expenses. He negotiated payment plans. He communicated openly with tenants instead of reacting emotionally. He treated the challenge like a problem to solve, not a disaster to fear. Slowly, stability returned. He learned something powerful during that period. Markets rise and fall, but discipline must remain constant. And just as the storm began to settle, an opportunity appeared that would test whether he was ready to step into a much bigger arena. A small commercial property downtown went up for sale at a discounted price. Most investors ignored it because it required vision and significant renovation. To him, it looked like the next level, but acquiring it would mean leveraging nearly everything he owned. It was the kind of move that separates cautious players from serious builders. For days he barely slept, running numbers repeatedly, calculating worst-case scenarios. He spoke to mentors he had slowly built relationships with over the years, older investors who respected his work ethic. One of them told him, "If you've prepared properly, trust your preparation." That sentence echoed in his mind. He remembered the library nights, the construction shifts, the hospital hallway, the broken window in winter. He wasn't gambling, he was executing. With steady hands, he signed the documents. Fear didn't disappear, but courage outweighed it. What he didn't know was that this decision would not only change his financial future, but finally begin to transform his mother's life in a visible way. Renovating the commercial property was the most demanding project of his life. Coordinating contractors, managing budgets, handling permits. Every mistake could cost thousands. He faced delays, supply shortages, and unexpected structural repairs. There were moments when exhaustion blurred his thinking, but he refused to let stress control him. Instead, he built systems, detailed schedules, clear communication, accountability for every dollar spent. Slowly, the empty building began transforming into a vibrant retail and office space. Local entrepreneurs signed leases, small businesses moved in. The building that others overlooked became a hub of activity, and with every signed contract, his cash flow strengthened. One evening, standing across the street and watching lights turn on inside the finished property, he felt something he had never felt before: stability. Real stability. Real stability. But there was one person who had not yet seen the full picture of what he had built, and he was about to surprise her in a way neither of them would ever forget. For years his mother had continued working, even when he told her she didn't have to. She never wanted to feel like a burden. She didn't fully understand the scale of what he was building. She only knew her son was working very hard. One quiet Sunday afternoon, he picked her up and told her he needed help choosing something important. They drove through neighborhoods she had only ever passed on the bus. Clean streets, strong houses, lawns covered in fresh spring sunlight. She looked confused but said nothing. When he stopped in front of a modest but beautiful detached home, she assumed he was dropping someone off. Instead, he handed her a small envelope. Inside was a set of keys. Her hands began to shake before her mind even understood. "It's yours," he said softly. No more rent, no more landlords. She tried to speak but couldn't. Tears fell the same way they used to fall at the kitchen table years ago, but this time they were not from fear. In that moment, the promise he made as a child in a freezing apartment became real. But this wasn't the end of his dream. It was only the beginning of something much bigger. With his mother finally secure, something shifted inside him again. For the first time, his drive was no longer fueled by survival. It was fueled by purpose. He began thinking beyond income and assets. He thought about impact. He remembered the humiliation of counting coins for lunch. He remembered not affording school trips. Quietly, he started a scholarship fund for students from low-income families in his city. At first it was small, just enough to help a few students buy books and pay tuition deposits. But word spread. Other business owners joined him. The fund grew. Every time he met a student who reminded him of his younger self, he felt grounded. Success, he realized, is empty if it only changes your own life. True success creates opportunity for others. Yet even as he gave back, he refused to become comfortable. Comfort, he knew, can slowly weaken ambition. And a new opportunity was forming, one that would push him onto a national stage. A national real estate conference invited him to speak about affordable housing development and disciplined investing. Standing backstage, looking at a large audience of investors, entrepreneurs and students, he felt a familiar nervousness. Not fear of failure, but respect for the journey. Years ago, he had sat in a public library reading about people like this. Now, he was one of them. When he stepped onto the stage, he didn't talk about profits first. He talked about the broken window, the hospital hallway, the coin counting at lunch, the nights he almost quit. The room was silent. Not because of dramatic storytelling, but because it was real. He spoke about discipline over motivation, long-term thinking over quick wins, ownership over consumption. By the time he finished, the audience wasn't just inspired, they were reflective. But as powerful as that moment was, his greatest test was still ahead, scaling responsibly without losing the values that built him. Growth at a larger scale demanded a different version of him. Expanding into multi-unit residential projects meant managing bigger loans, larger teams, and higher expectations. Mistakes were no longer small and personal, they could affect dozens of families. He felt the weight of responsibility deeply. Instead of rushing expansion, he slowed down strategically. He hired experienced advisors. He built a strong management team. He studied leadership the same way he once studied business fundamentals in the library. He learned that being the hardest worker in the room is powerful, but building the strongest team is transformational. There were difficult conversations, tough negotiations, and moments when deals collapsed at the last minute. Each setback tested his patience. But unlike the boy who once felt powerless, he now understood timing. Sustainable success required discipline not just in effort, but in decision-making. As his developments began providing affordable, well-maintained housing to families across the city, he realized something profound. He was no longer chasing stability, he was creating it for others. Yet one unexpected phone call would soon remind him that growth without balance can quietly rebuild the very stress he once escaped. The phone call came late at night. His mother had felt chest pain and was being taken to the hospital. The same cold fear from his teenage years rushed back instantly. He drove through the quiet Canadian streets, memories flooding his mind. The exhaustion, the sacrifices, the promises. Sitting in the hospital waiting area again, he realized how easily success can distract you from what truly matters. He had been working non-stop, chasing expansion, proving himself again and again. But what was the point if he lost the person who gave him strength in the first place? Thankfully, the diagnosis was not severe. Stress and minor complications, nothing life-threatening. Relief washed over him. But that night changed him. He adjusted his schedule, he delegated more, he committed to balance. Success was no longer about building endlessly, it was about building wisely. And in finding that balance, he unlocked a new level of clarity that would define the legacy he wanted to leave behind. With renewed focus, he expanded his mission beyond profit and property. He partnered with local organizations to renovate aging buildings into affordable, energy-efficient housing. He launched mentorship programs for young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. He began investing in community spaces, libraries, youth centers, small business hubs. The same boy who once sought warmth in a public library was now funding renovations for others to study in comfort. Media outlets began sharing his story, calling him a self-made success. But he never liked that phrase. He knew he was built by struggle, by his mother's resilience, by cold winters and empty refrigerators. At community events, he would often say, "Your starting point does not decide your finish line." And when he said it, people believed him, because he lived it. Yet even as recognition grew, he remained grounded, always remembering the broken home that shaped his hunger. Years later, standing on the balcony of a high-rise development he helped create, overlooking a glowing Canadian skyline at sunset, he reflected on the journey. The boy who once stared at a cracked ceiling had become a builder of ceilings for others. The child who feared eviction now created homes for families. Wealth had come, yes, but more importantly, control, dignity, and impact had come with it. His mother, now healthy and peaceful, often reminded him how proud she was, not of the man he became. Discipline had shaped him. Belief had sustained him. Hard work had elevated him. But love for his mother and the promise he made had driven him. And as he looked across the city lights, he understood that dreams are not fantasies, they are responsibilities waiting to be claimed. If you are watching this and feel trapped in your own broken beginning, remember this: poverty is a chapter, not a conclusion. A single-parent household is not a limitation. It can be the birthplace of unbreakable strength. You may not control where you start. You may not control the storms outside your window tonight, but you control your discipline, you control your choices, you control whether pain becomes your excuse or your training ground. The boy in the freezing apartment did not wait for perfect conditions. He built through imperfection. Step by step, skill by skill, decision by decision. And one day, those small disciplined actions became a life that once felt impossible. So ask yourself, what promise will you make tonight? And more importantly, will you keep it when it becomes difficult?